On October 9th, 1781, George Washington personally fired the first shot at Yorktown. This symbolic act marked the beginning of the final and most decisive battle of the American Revolutionary War. The largest British field army in America, commanded by General Charles Cornwallis, had entrenched itself in the small Virginia town, and Washington, after a grueling march south, was determined to confront and destroy them. The Siege of Yorktown would be characterized by relentless artillery bombardment, impeccable timing, and a daring assault that would go down in history as one of the most spectacular military operations of the 18th century. It was not only George Washington's greatest military achievement, but also the turning point that secured American independence. By the spring of 1781, the American cause was in dire straits. Public support for the war was waning, the continental currency had become nearly worthless, and the Continental Army, underpaid and poorly supplied, teetered on the brink of mutiny. Meanwhile, multiple British armies threatened the southern states, and General Henry Clinton, the British commander-in-chief, remained firmly entrenched in New York City with a formidable force. George Washington, who had served as commander-in-chief of the Continental Army for over 5 years, understood the gravity of the situation. In a letter to his allies, he wrote, "We are at the end of our tether. Now or never, our deliverance must come." If the campaign of 1781 failed to produce results, the American struggle for independence would be in grave jeopardy. Chapter 1. All eggs in one basket. Washington's strategy for the 1781 campaign season was bold and ambitious. He planned to attack New York City, the center of British power in America. This plan became feasible thanks to the arrival of French reinforcements the previous year. The Count of Rochambeau, a seasoned French general, had led approximately 5,500 troops to America and was now stationed at Newport, Rhode Island, ready for a joint operation. Additionally, the French government had dispatched a second fleet under the command of Admiral de Grasse, which was initially bound for the West Indies but was expected to sail north to support Washington and Rochambeau after completing its mission. On May 22, 1781, Washington and Rochambeau met in Wethersfield, Connecticut, to finalize their plans for the campaign. Washington, ever cautious, was reluctant to rely on de Grasse's timely arrival and insisted on focusing their efforts on New York. Rochambeau, however, believed that the Allies could achieve greater success in the South, where General Cornwallis had consolidated several smaller British contingents and was threatening Virginia with a force of over 7,000 men. Despite Rochambeau's arguments, Washington prevailed, and the Allied forces began their march toward New York in July. When the Allies arrived in New York, they found the city heavily fortified. The British, under Clinton's command, had spent the past 3 years strengthening their defenses, and Washington quickly realized that a direct assault would be costly and likely unsuccessful. For over a month, he searched for a way to breach the British lines, but no clear opportunity presented itself. Then, on August 14th, a messenger arrived with news that would change the course of the campaign. Admiral de Grasse had left the West Indies with 29 ships and 3,200 soldiers and was en route to Virginia. However, de Grasse also warned that he would need to return to France before the onset of winter, leaving the Allies with only about 2 months to exploit their naval superiority. Washington now faced the most critical decision of his military career. Should he remain in his strong position near New York, or should he risk a forced march south and commit all his resources to a single high-stakes campaign in Virginia? The risks were enormous. There was no guarantee that Cornwallis would still be in Yorktown by the time the Allies arrived, and no certainty that de Grasse's fleet would arrive in time, or at all. Nevertheless, after careful deliberation, Washington decided to seize the opportunity. "We must put all our eggs in one basket," he reportedly said, and the Allies began their march south on August 19th. Chapter 2. The Rocky Road to Yorktown. The Allied march to Yorktown was a logistical marvel. Approximately 4,000 French soldiers and 3,000 Continental troops moved south overland, while Admiral de Barra transported supplies, artillery, and equipment along the coast in 9 ships. Secrecy was paramount. If General Clinton discovered the Allies' true objective, he could send reinforcements to Cornwallis or warn him to evacuate Yorktown. To deceive Clinton, Washington employed a series of clever ruses. He leaked forged letters suggesting that New York remained the primary target, ordered his troops to feign preparations for a siege, and chose a march route that appeared to indicate an attack on New York from the south. The deception worked brilliantly, and it took weeks for the British to realize what was happening. Meanwhile, Cornwallis had been maneuvering in Virginia, closely followed by a smaller American force under the command of the Marquis de Lafayette, a young French officer who had become one of Washington's most trusted subordinates. Cornwallis's mission was to establish a fortified base in Virginia and disrupt the rebels' economic and military infrastructure. Lafayette, though outnumbered, harassed the British at every opportunity, skirmishing with their rear guard and gathering intelligence on their movements. On August 30th, Lafayette sent a dispatch to Washington with crucial news. The enemy went round to York. Cornwallis had taken up a defensive position at Yorktown just as Washington had hoped. As the Allies approached Head of Elk, Maryland, they gathered every available boat and began transporting troops and supplies down the Chesapeake Bay. De Grasse arrived in the bay in late August and immediately dispatched additional transport vessels to assist the Allies. He also sent troops to reinforce Lafayette and blockaded the bay with his fleet, cutting off Cornwallis's escape by sea. Clinton, realizing the threat, ordered Admiral Thomas Graves to sail from New York with 19 warships and challenge the French fleet. Graves expected to face a smaller force, but when he arrived off the Chesapeake on September 5th, he was stunned to find 24 French ships of the line and 5 frigates waiting for him. The resulting Battle of the Chesapeake was a fierce but indecisive engagement. Though neither side achieved a clear victory, the French maintained control of the bay, and Graves was forced to withdraw to New York, leaving Cornwallis isolated. Chapter 3. Time is of the essence. By mid-September, the Allies had assembled their forces near Yorktown, and Washington faced a new challenge: time. During a visit to de Grasse's flagship, the Ville de Paris, Washington and Rochambeau convinced the admiral to remain in the Chesapeake until the end of October. However, de Grasse refused to stay a day longer, meaning the Allies had only 6 weeks to complete their mission. Cornwallis, meanwhile, had fortified Yorktown with a series of outposts, batteries, and a strong gun emplacement at Gloucester Point, across the York River. Rochambeau, the only Allied commander with extensive siege experience, recognized that the British defenses were too strong for a direct assault. The only option was a formal siege, a methodical and time-consuming process that involved digging trenches to approach the enemy's lines. On September 29th, the Allies began their advance toward Yorktown. The British greeted them with a thunderous artillery barrage, but the damage was minimal. That night, Cornwallis made a fateful decision. He withdrew his troops from the outer fortifications, tightening his defensive lines but ceding valuable ground to the Allies. The Americans quickly occupied the abandoned positions and began constructing their own fortifications. On October 5th, the Allies opened the first parallel, a trench line just 600 yards from the British defenses. Washington himself participated in the ceremony, striking the first blows with a pickaxe to inspire his men. Over the next several nights, the Allied troops, guided by French engineers, worked tirelessly to complete their gun emplacements. By October 9th, the Allied artillery was ready, and Washington personally fired the first shot, signaling the start of a devastating bombardment. Over the next 2 weeks, nearly 3,600 shells rained down on Yorktown every day, reducing the town to rubble and forcing Cornwallis to retreat to a makeshift bunker. The trenches inched closer, and on October 14th, the Allies began work on the second parallel. However, 2 key British outposts, redoubts Noset 9 and 10, blocked their progress. These heavily fortified positions, surrounded by abattis and defended by well-armed troops, would have to be stormed. Chapter 4. The Storm on Yorktown. On the night of October 14th, 400 French soldiers advanced against Redoubt No. 9, while an equal number of Americans attacked Redoubt No. 10. The French faced fierce resistance and suffered heavy casualties, but eventually overwhelmed the defenders. The Americans, using sappers to breach the entrenchment, surrounded Redoubt No. 10 and captured it after a brutal hand-to-hand fight. With these obstacles cleared, the Allies completed the second parallel and tightened their grip on Yorktown. Cornwallis, desperate to escape, ordered a nighttime sortie on October 16th, but the attack failed to disrupt the Allied lines. The next day, he attempted to evacuate his troops across the York River, but a violent storm scattered the boats and forced him to abandon the effort. By October 17th, the situation was hopeless. Cornwallis signaled his surrender, and on October 19th, the British Army formally capitulated. Over 8,000 soldiers became prisoners of war, and the artillery was handed over to the Allies. The Siege of Yorktown marked the end of major fighting in the American Revolutionary War, forcing the British government to negotiate peace. The victory at Yorktown was celebrated across America, and one soldier captured the mood of the moment. Every American present threw his cocked hat up in the air and shouted, "America is ours!" For George Washington, it was the culmination of years of struggle and sacrifice, a triumph that secured his place in history as the father of a new nation.